When I think about the way we used to be, when I think about the things it took from me, I know that I am so much better. When I look at what I've done, now that we're...
Hello everybody, bonjour. Welcome to Tasting with Julien, episode number 2. This is Social Vignerons Wine Tasting Show, and I'm your host, Julien Miquel. Yes, that's Miguel with a Q, but Julien is the first name. Today we're tasting some champagne wine, but not any champagne wine. Today we're trying Belle Epoque by famous Champagne House Perrier Jouet. This is one of the most famous and prestigious indeed Prestige Cuvées from Champagne. This is a top vintage champagne, and not only are we trying one vintage, we're actually going to be trying two. This is 2008, this is 2011, two of the last releases. So today we're talking champagne, we're talking Belle Epoque, and getting to the bottom of why those are very special wines. We're going to be uncorking these little babies, I'm going to be scoring them and tasting them for you, and we're going to be discussing whether you someday should also consider buying those, tasting those, see what they're really worth. But before we do that, let's roll out the intro.
I could feel it in my bones. There was something going on.
This is the Church of Auvilliers, where Dom Perignon is buried. So what's so special about Belle Epoque Perrier Jouet? Let's find out. Tom Stevenson, who's one of the top champagne experts in the world, says about Belle Epoque that not only the quality is extraordinarily high, but he also says that no other Prestige Cuvée can match the consistency of style that Belle Epoque stamps on every vintage. So let's find out whether it's true by tasting two different vintages, and let's uncork and taste this little baby. But first, let's start by talking a bit about the history of this wine. The history behind Belle Epoque is actually quite interesting. Back in 1902, the then owner of Perrier Jouet asked a French local glass designer, very famous, Émile Gallet, who was one of the founding fathers of the Art Nouveau movement. That's an artistic movement that reproduces the beauty of nature. He asked them to design a very special bottle, and that's what Émile Gallet back in 1902 came up with. This is a Japanese anemone flower. The idea behind the bottle was to translate somewhat of the expression of Chardonnay on the bottle, and you can definitely see how these little white flowers can evoke Chardonnay. But they realized back in 1902 that actually designing and making this bottle would result extremely costly at the beginning of the 20th century. So they sort of forgot the idea about this beautiful bottle, and it only came to revival with vintage 1964, and that was released back in 1969. This bottle has a century-old and more history, but it's only been produced for about 50 years.
When I think about the way we used to be, when I think about the things it took from me, I know that I am so...
Okay, enough history. Let's try this little baby. We're starting with vintage 2011. This is the last release. It has to be said that Belle Epoque spends about 6 years in its bottle, lying down on its lees. As much as I love those glasses, they're great for cocktail parties, but they're not 100% ideal for tasting and appreciating the wine to its fullest. So I'm just going to transfer it to a much wider glass that's going to allow me to taste it better. The color is really bright, a bright and shiny lemon yellow color with hints of golden hues, probably from so much aging in the bottle. We want to aerate the wine a little bit. We want to liberate all the aromas. What strikes first is the brioche laziness, but we're talking sourdough brioche here, not only buttery brioche. There's an element of lazy, yeasty character to it. It's complemented by delicate, subtle spices. We've got white pepper, a little touches of nutmeg. All of this gives a lot of complexity and sort of hectic feel to the nose. About vintage 2011 in Champagne, this is what Jancis Robinson, Master of Wine, says about vintage 2011. It was a vintage notable for its erratic growing season, which started warm and dry, but then became cooler and wetter in June and July. Conditions improved briefly in August, but the early harvest was problematic. So, difficult vintage. What first strikes when you taste Belle Epoque, at least this 2011 vintage, is the tension and the minerality, the acidic tension of the acidity all along the tasting. This minerality that comes through is most certainly coming from the Chardonnay in the blend. So Belle Epoque is made for a slightly dominant Chardonnay element to the blend. There's about 50% Chardonnay. The Chardonnay comes from a Grand Cru vineyard that's called Cramant in the Côte de Blanc, so that's the best area for Chardonnay in Champagne, and it produces some of the best Chardonnays in the world. This is not a Blanc de Blanc. It also includes 45% Pinot Noir from the Montagne de Reims, which is the best area for growing Pinot Noir, also Grand Cru vineyards. Pinot Noir adds fruitiness and liveliness to the blend. Pinot Noir adds layers of citrus, but more like pink grapefruit citrus to a champagne. It also adds some body and shoulders. Obviously Pinot Noir is a red grape, so it comes with a little bit more body, a little bit more of an oily texture that coats your palate. The bubbles here are super fine. They're hardly noticeable except for the creaminess and the smoothness that they give. Finally, Belle Epoque contains 5% of Pinot Meunier. That's another red grape that is typical and classic in Champagne. Pinot Meunier here is grown in a little village that's called Dizy, probably to remind us that wine is indeed alcohol. I would give this a 92 plus out of 100 wine score. But let's move on to vintage 2008. Jancis Robinson said about vintage 2008 that initially it was difficult. It was a damp year with widespread mildew, drying conditions in August, and a fine warm September proved many producers saving grace. So difficult year, but August and September brought some sunshine and ripeness to the fruit. Straight away the color seems a little bit more intense. It still has some green hue, but it's got more intensity to the color, more golden hues. The nose is somewhat in the same style. It's definitely lemony. It's got some lime. It's got the elderflower and lily floral edges to it, but it's certainly more nuttiness to it. There is some hazelnut, a bit of macadamia. Yeah. Oof. This is in fact a completely different world. I guess there is an element of consistency in the style, and I guess there is the same citrusy, there is the same tension that I was talking about the Chardonnay before. But this 2008 has a lot more shoulders, a lot more body. The depth and intensity of flavors in there is just another world compared to 2011. But the brioche here has been toasted and caramelized, almost burnt. This is an incredibly joyful wine, bursting with flavors all over the place. Oh my god, the acidity is driving the palate and bringing a lot of freshness, but there is so much going on elsewhere. It's coating your palate. I could probably go 96 out of 100 as I'm tasting it today. There is so much going on, so much depth and complexity. Belle Epoque 2008 is an absolute winner. A conclusion. Is there consistency in style in Belle Epoque? Yeah, I think we can say yes. Belle Epoque combines the tension, all the goodness that we like and we love about Chardonnay from Champagne, the tension, the finesse and the elegance that we love and expect from a high-end Prestige Cuvée Champagne. Definitely what it adds is the joyfulness, the exuberance of flavor of Pinot Noir and a touch of Pinot Meunier. What I really love about Belle Epoque style is that it's kind of appears like the perfect champagne blend. Tension, minerality, but also, you know, let's stay joyful, let's enjoy ourselves, let's have some fruit, let's have some spices, let's have some ripe citrus, grapefruity, orangey ripeness to the wine. So Belle Epoque brings in and packs everything up into the bottles, which is definitely successful. 2011 against 2008 doesn't really prove or show the consistency in style that I was reading about before. I'd love to know your experience with Belle Epoque. Maybe I've chosen and I've just ended up with two vintages that are really different. I'd love to know your thoughts. I would also love to know which is your preferred Prestige Cuvée Champagne and why. To have your opinion, so maybe leave a note in the description down below. Also let me know what I could do better, what I should do better. It's actually cost me a lot. It's been really hard to shoot these videos, so forgive me if the editing is a bit comme ci comme ça. Second episode, I guess, just really hard. I was lucky, beginner's luck with the first one. Second one was really hard, but you know, I enjoyed tasting those wines. Definitely, I hope you've enjoyed the episode as well. And I'll see you soon in the wine world.
Might be shaken but not stirred. Just a lesson that I've learned. And so it goes. Tables turn in your own.
Oh, and as a bonus, shall we play around with pronunciation, French pronunciation of the things that we talked about today? Perrier Jouet. Perrier Jouet. Say Belle Epoque, please, s'il vous plaît.
The valley of the Marne River, area for producing champagne wine, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and the main grape variety here is Pinot Meunier. So just want to give you an overview of the
If we're talking about Grand Cru vineyards, you would say Cremant, and that wouldn't be Chardonnay, it would be Chardonnay, s'il vous plaît. Montagne de Reims. You've heard about Reims, the capital of Champagne, the home of many of the great houses in Champagne. Perrier Jouet is actually based in Épernay.